Hey everyone, wherever you are, hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today we are joined by Mob and Hanzo, the founders of Fungify. Fungify is a non-custodial NFT peer-to-peer peer-to-contract marketplace and algorithmic lending protocol allowing for instant NFT sales, immediate NFT-backed loans, and a yield-bearing NFT index token. That is a lot to take in. We'll talk more about it in the later half of the show. Before we get into the details, let's have a quick chat about their background. Mob Hanzo, thank you so much for making time in your evening. I appreciate it. Whoever wants to go first, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here. And yeah, it's quite late here in the Eastern time zone. My background is in electrical and biomedical engineering, about a decade worth of engineering experience, starting as a controls engineer, designing and building airport systems, then got into designing, developing, programming automation systems. That eventually led into me becoming a senior staff engineer at an organization that develops the industrial protocol. And unlike development in the crypto space, this type of protocol development was very different. But I had a lot of good experiences there. And I eventually transitioned full time into crypto in 2017 with my first startup, which was related to renewable energy assets and peer to peer energy trading. Those eventually became pilot projects down in Brazil and California. And things got spicy last couple of years with the NFT boom. And that's where Fungify was born and what we're here to talk about.
Fantastic. Mob, what about you?
Yeah, so I got into crypto full time in 2017 after graduate school. Read the Ethereum paper when it came out. I was instantly like really into it. I was really into DeFi, especially right from the beginning. So I started out of school working at DeFi protocols since 2017. I have a top wallet on Degen Score from the very beginning. And yeah, around the time that DeFi guys started colliding with NFTs, like around the time of Loot, I started really getting much more into the space. And then at Hanzo and the Fungify idea was born.
That sounds exciting. A question I always ask people who appear on the show, guys, is like, what was that first memory that sort of said, okay, I've got to give crypto a try, I've got to give NFTs a try? Since we're talking about Fungify and NFTs, so what's that first memory that say, okay, NFTs are interesting, I should look more carefully into this?
Yeah, for me, it was a colleague pulled me back into the space. I was actually taking a break in 2019 after the big bear. And what fascinated me was this idea of permanence. The data could live on the blockchain for as long as the blockchain existed. And to me, I think the Ethereum blockchain will be here for a long time to come. And back then, the question about metadata and where storage for these NFTs is held was a really important question. And soon after, even after sort of the bull has died down, these questions are coming back up. So for me, it was just the permanence idea. This digital data could exist for so long and could serve as sort of these memory points in history.
That's amazing and interesting and a very different answer from what we typically get. Mob, what about you? What was that first idea for you?
Yeah, I think it was like March of 2021. I think I read an article. It was the Fat Crypto Punks thesis. And it convinced me. And I thought it was just like totally obvious. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. I should get really involved in these NFT things. It is right around that moment. And then I bought a CryptoPunk and I thought that was great. And that was like a really good at the time. And I just like being in the space was quite rewarding. But I don't think I first got in like first with CryptoPunks and then later with Loot a bit more. And then it was after that I started like really diving into the space and being fully immersed.
Cool. I've never actually met someone who started off with CryptoPunk, so that's interesting. If we had more time, we could talk about it, but I don't want to keep you guys for too long. I have to dive into the legal disclaimer as a reminder to anyone listening to this. Anything said by either Mob or Hanzo does not constitute financial advice. Our opinions are our own and not to be connected with either 21 Co or Fungify. Everyone, please do your own research. I'm so glad both of you are here today because I've actually never had this like exclusive NFT show. Not to mention, Fungify is a really interesting idea. Going through your docs and preparations for the show was fun and pretty exciting. So I'm glad I'm here. I get to ask you guys questions. To anyone listening, all the links for everything we're going to be talking about will be down in the podcast show notes. So please have a look at those if you want to explore more on your own. Mob Hanso, I did the introduction, but on a simple level, whoever wants to take this question, what are you guys trying to do with Fungify?
Yeah, sure. At its core, we want to make NFTs as liquid as altcoins. I'm going to let that soak in for a second. But when you look at the NFT market out there right now and you look at these PFT collections, they're basically microcaps that are being traded as altcoins, right? But the one big difference is that because of the non fungible nature of these tokens, they have to be traded in whole units, right? And that adds a huge barrier to entry for participants. And that's what causes a lot of this friction and leads to this illiquidity problem within the NFT market. So when we first started with Fungify, we were looking at basically fractionalizing NFTs into fungible ERC20s. And we said, okay, how can we make this possible? How can we grow this idea? And we said, okay, the core mechanic for Fungify will be a single vol that will have a universal pricing mechanism. So when an NFT holder comes in and says, hey, I want instant liquidity, they would be able to deposit that NFT into the vault and exchange. They would get back tokens that represent fractional ownership of this vault. And on the other side, people can purchase these fractional tokens and gain exposure to the content of this vault. So, in essence, what we're talking about is an index that's fully backed by the NFTs contained within the vault. So, for simplicity's sake, from now on, I'm just going to refer to these fractional tokens as index tokens, and then that'll make the conversation a little bit easier. But that's basically a naive core.
Like one big difference from like the like fractional approach is that because of the oracle you get pro-rata redemption, so you don't really have the same reconstitution problem that a lot of the other fractional protocols encounter.
Yeah, and as I was mentioning, so this was like the core idea. Even that on its own is a killer app, right? You have one vault with all of this liquidity concentrated into this one vault and this index that people can trade, right? But beyond that, when you start looking at actual NFT holders, for a lot of them, the NFTs that they hold are actually more than just altcoins, right? They're brands or identities, or they have a serious attachment to the NFT that they hold. And so, what about them? How do we come up with a solution that serves them? So for them, they want to be able to come to this index, gain access to liquidity, and still have the ability to keep rights to their NFT or specific redemption. So we amended the vault and said there's going to be a reserve side and an unreserved side. So people who want to hold on to their NFT would use the reserve side, while the unreserved side would be for those who just want to freely submit their NFTs and gain these fractional ownership of the vault. Now, the obvious question is, okay, if both options are freely available, obviously everyone would reserve their NFT and there would be no NFTs within the unreserved side, so those could be freely redeemed for the index tokens. And so we need a way for people to be able to pay, or for the reservers to pay a fee to the unreserved side. And for those who've been in the DeFi space for some time, will understand that this is isomorphic to the problem of lending, right? Since we have reservation of any NFT, it means that it no longer provides liquidity for redemptions, and someone needs to be paid for providing the liquidity. So there needs to be some type of mechanism to price that liquidity. And that's basically what leads into what the lending portion of Fungify, which is this algorithmic interest rate, right? So you have the index component and then you have the lending component, which is essentially just a way for you to reserve an NFT. In other words, you're borrowing against your NFT as collateral. We can break that down if that was still a little too deep.
That was a bit deep, but I think it's still fairly understandable for people who are probably listening to this on the actual podcast. I don't want to ask Mob, you mentioned pro-rata redemptions, and for people who are not familiar with the term, Mob, maybe you could explain that to some of the listeners who are listening at the moment.
So normally for a lot of other approaches where there's been fractionalization of NFTs, if there's a bunch of different things in the vault, you can't just go and try to redeem and get one of them or get an equivalent value like object from that heterogeneous vault, right? There's not been a mechanism for it. And basically the reason for that is because it's difficult to appraise things. It's difficult to have prices and oracles, and the space has been really incipient. We actually did anticipate that there would be an oracle mechanism. We worked on our own. We looked around the space, and sure enough, Chainlink NFT floor price feeds, they've come around. You hook them up, you put things that the floor price feeds can actually value, and now you have a way where you can have a whole bunch of different NFTs in the same vault, and you can do redemptions and get equivalent value. Now, the way we actually do that is a random redemption with the Chainlink VRF Oracle, as a matter of fact. But that's the key magic sauce here.
That is awesome. Chainlink, we have a researcher on our team who's a big fan of Chainlink. I know he's going to be listening to this episode. I'm going to hit you guys with a simple question because you guys did mention fractionalizing NFTs, and we had scheduled this quite a bit early. So I had posted questions to our community. And I apologize for this question, but someone was asking, like, is this what Beeple did with his $69 million NFT? Is this what you guys are doing with fractionalizing NFTs?
Oh,
Why?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
that's a great question because that really highlights the difference. Because with the Beeple NFT collection, you didn't really have any rights from that token. And so that token went into basically becoming worthless because you had to have 51% of the collection and do a governance vote. And then, oh, you can do a buyout or something like that. And so the token didn't really convincingly confer rights. Whereas when you have a token that you can just go deposit into the vault, the Oracle reads the price, and you get a random NFT that should be around that value. That's a totally different ballgame. You're not. That's the Beeple problem is like fundamentally about the reconstitution problem, and that's what the Oracle solves.
Nice. And for people who are listening, right, you guys mentioned it. I know like we have a June Analytics dashboard that tracks like NFT traffic and trades and that sort of stuff. And I know at the moment you could argue Ethereum and Solana are doing really well in terms of NFTs, but you guys are, and Fungify specifically on the Ethereum blockchain, you're not dealing with any Solana NFTs at the moment.
No, to start with, we're dealing with what we're classifying as blue chip NFTs. So those would be the top 6 collections that we've identified. And that's what will seed the initial index. And from there on out, we will grow the index or add collections to the index based on DAO votes and some certain criteria. So right now it's just Ethereum collections that are on the Ethereum mainnet.
Okay. And you mentioned like the top 6 collections. Like, how does seeding work? Are you guys purchasing these NFTs and putting them in the vault, or are people going to? You mentioned reserved and unreserved before. How are you encouraging people to actually use this platform and put their NFTs into the vault?
So that's actually part of our go-to-market strategy. That there's what we're calling "quote unquote" the Great Fill event, and more details will be revealed. But the initial seeding, there will be incentives to actually bring forth people and deposit NFTs from those specific collections to fill the initial vault, or when the vault is actually first initialized. There'll be more details about specifics of what incentives will exist or be in place, but that's all I can say for now.
Yeah, I think as a baseline, we'll be doing something community. We'll be doing something other people from the DAO, and then we'll have incentives for new community members.
Very cool. I did want to ask you guys as well, right? Because most people listening to this, not most people, some people would be familiar with, like you guys mentioned, some of the other sort of NFT lending and borrowing protocols, and especially in 2022 with all the market volatility and NFT market volatility, all the issues they ran into. Do you guys have a plan in case we are? It's not looking like it, but in case there is more market volatility this year, not just in crypto, but in NFTs, how are you going to prevent people from depositing their NFTs and then lo and behold, later on, prices are not what they should be?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. The great thing about like it being an NFT index is that it's like you don't really lose in the volatility sense, right? Like you're holding it, you're just getting exposure to the overall NFT market. Maybe your question is more towards the borrower side of things. Like there's been incidents like Ben Dow, they had some problems with liquidations. They had to look at the parameters and how they were liquidating things. I think the biggest thing about our index and the way that you borrow against it, your collateral is being borrowed against the NFT index itself. That means that your collateral has to do very, very, very poorly against the overall index in order for you to even be at risk of liquidation. And that's one of the selling points here is like we isolate all of that volatility on our protocol, and that's just not a very like volatile component of the whole lending process. So we go and we isolate that volatility, and on top of that we do margin calls. Not only are you borrowing against something that's not very volatile, which is like an NFT in an index against the overall index itself, but then there's also margin calls. I think overall our system is probably best designed to deal with this sort of volatility because it actually factors out the non-NFT market part of the volatility from the entire equation as far as the protocol is concerned.
Mob, you just perfectly read my mind when you answered that question because I couldn't think of the name at the moment. I'm like, bend out. That is exactly what I was asking. So thank you for doing that. And I did want to ask you guys because as going through your docs, and you've talked about the NFT index token, and I saw the term, and I believe Hanzo mentioned it earlier in this podcast, was the idea of community curation. And everyone loves NFTs are definitely becoming more and more community driven. I've felt, at least during my participation. How's community curation going to work for Fungify?
So to start with, we have a certain criteria. We've said that in order for a collection to be considered as a part of the index, first it must have a chain link NFT floor price feed. And the second criteria we're looking at is the market capitalization of at least 50 million. And that's the initial criteria that we've set. Beyond that, in terms of NFT collections that can be added to the index, that criteria can be set forth by the DAO or adjusted by the DAO. So there's that community component there. And then beyond that, there could be some mechanism by which, or basically a mechanism where we take votes on which collections are considered and voted in and then initialized within the index. So that's the community curation part of what you're mentioning.
Hanzo and Mob, like one of the things, like looking at your site, right? There's a bunch of different types of users, and guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I remember seeing different terms for different users, and you have that wonderful graphic explaining the interactions. So, does everybody get a vote in terms of all these different users? How do all these different users work?
Oh, sure. In terms of voting, DAO voting, that's specifically through holding the Funge token, the Fungify token that will be issued later on. So just like any other governance token, that's what we'll use to participate in the governance of the protocol itself. In terms of the other users you mentioned, there's the seller, borrower, and redeemer. Those can be better classified through or better explained through the different use cases that Fungify offers to its end users. The first use case is the ability to get NFT exposure via holding the index. The second is the ability to borrow against your NFT using it as collateral. And finally, the ability to sell your NFT to gain instant liquidity. Now, if you don't mind, I can expand on those and
Please
talk
do.
about the various. Yeah. So all of these solutions do actually already exist in the market, right? But if you look at how Fungify is doing this, you can see how it's clearly better, or we offer the better solution. So let's start from the top of the list, which is get NFT exposure through our index. Unlike any other index that exists right now in the market, our index actually offers yield. So on top of just having the ability to gain exposure to the NFT market, our ability to gain yield or get yield natively is the differentiator. And that yield comes from the lending component and the various fees we collect through sales that happen within the index. And then second, the ability to borrow against your NFT. And this is something that Mob was mentioning earlier. We can offer lowest rates and we're the most capital efficient because we're offering this synthetic token that people actually want for its pure utility. It's a maker DAO effect where you have a token that people want that drives the lending liquidity for our protocol. In the case of MakerDAO, it's DAI, the stable token that drives the lending liquidity. In our case, it's the index token that people want to hold, and that's what drives the lending liquidity. So this is what allows us to offer the best rates in the market. And then to what Mob was saying, because these loans are denominated in the NFT index, it means that your chances of getting liquidated or margin called are much lower because we factor out the volatility. It's the volatility, the only volatility you have to be concerned about is the intra in NFT volatility, basically how your NFT is performing against the NFT index. And I think that's like a huge point because that means lending protocol is the safest place where you can actually borrow against your NFT. And then finally, the ability to sell your NFT for instant liquidity. Unlike other protocols like where there's multiple vaults where you're trying to sell into NFTX, because we have a single vault, that means that we have the deepest liquidity and it results in the least amount of slippage. And so again, ability to sell your NFT with the least amount of slippage, I think that's a pretty important use case and one that I think differentiates Fungify.
That's definitely a big differentiation. I'm listening to this and I'm getting more and more excited. And guys, like you've talked about plans, right? You talked about the great fill, and without giving too much away, of course, like what's the general roadmap? People are like listening to this, are like, okay, I want to get involved with Fungify. What should they be expecting in terms of a timeline? How can they get involved? How would you like them to get involved?
I would say join our Discord. Probably by the time this podcast is released, we'll have released the article detailing what to do next in terms of the Great Fill. So I'd say check out our Substack, check out our Twitter, check out our Discord, and hang around in the coming days and maybe right now while you're listening to this, because it's very possible that things are already happening and there will be new things for you to do.
Very cool. All right, guys, let's take a step back from this conversation. And I know there'll be people listening to this who are not big fans of NFTs or crypto in general. I get to look at podcast analytics, which is why I know they're like totally not involved in crypto at all. But these people are like, okay, I keep seeing all these articles, NFTs are dying. You know this, I know it, this is not true. But what do you guys think about the state of the NFT market as it exists today on February 1st, 2023?
Yeah, as far as dying, the media tends to just extrapolate what's ever happening like out linearly, but the crypto market is cyclical. I think every person who's involved in the market acknowledges it's cyclical. Maybe a lot of people who aren't involved with the market have doubts whether it's cyclical. To us, NFTs just had their first cycle basically, and it's really exciting like when you consider what that implies about how far it can go when you look at other things in the crypto space that have been just like emerging assets. So it there's I think there's two like big emerging verticals right now. Things are a little bit calmer, even though I think they could be starting to heat up. There's like gaming right now, which is just like pure utility focused, and then the art vertical is really taking off as well, like doing like prospering a lot even during the bear, and people are using that more for like investment and speculation, but that's a lot like the real world art. I think like right now where we are in the NFT market though, it's like where we are actually makes like very little sense in a lot of ways, right? The ratio of attention that we have on NFTs to like the market cap of all the NFTs combined, I looked it up earlier today, it was like 11.7 billion. It
Wow.
like the value of every NFT collection combined is not even worth the market cap of Cardano, let alone Ripple. Like, we're talking about like one of the biggest technological and cultural revolutions in history. And the entire sector isn't even at the size of some goofy cult of personality. NFTs are like a killer use case. I think they belong at the top with Ethereum, with God forbid Ripple. I think if we have all this attention, and usually attention is money, I think it really all comes down to it needs to be financialized more, and we need to break down the barriers for capital to enter. We need more ways that capital can assemble together so that if somebody has $5, they can put it in. Like right now, it is just so hard. You want exposure to apes or something like that, and you don't have all the money for it. All the ways to do it, have quite a bit of slippage if you want just fractional exposure. So I think we need to lower the barriers to entry, and then we're going to get a space that's way more economically inclusive and is totally different because it's much bigger. And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, and it sounds fantastic. And that is something when I first started looking into NFTs, I'm like, oh my God, 100 ETH for this or 50 ETH or 2000 Solana when Solana was top of the charts at that point is pretty difficult for the average mom and dad or Joe or Jane to enter. Given the pedigree that you guys show, and if someone listening to this at the end, like you should go back and listen to Hanzo and Mob's background. But to people who are thinking about starting NFT collections or people who already have them, what do you guys suggest? How can NFT creators better improve their collections to hopefully be included in Fungify at some point in the future? What do you guys suggest for people who are thinking about creating NFTs at the moment?
Get really famous first. No, I'm only half joking, but no, do something different. There's this mantra out there in the NFT community about they're saying, okay, NFTs need to have utility, they need to have community, they need to have this sort of list of three things that people keep pounding the table on. But the reality is, in terms of actually creating a successful NFT project, you do have to differentiate, right? You have to find some way to innovate, and beyond that, there's going to be a lot of trials and errors, right? Like I do think NFT specifically, if you look at it's not in the early in the market where sort of a lot of people were just pumping these up and selling them, and there was like this cycle that was occurring. Now that sort of we've matured, you really do have to stand out and do something innovative, have quote unquote real utility, but I can't be the one to tell you what that utility is. But yeah, that's, I think I don't have the magic answer to that question.
Yeah, I agree with Hanzo. Innovation's the answer. You look at being a historical NFT is worked for a lot of them, and I think can still work. Like the narrative has completely taken a backseat ever since apes flipped punks, but I do think innovation still wins out, and it is the truest way to get to the top.
Yeah, I just like last note on that too. I think we're going back to the fundamentals in some ways too. I think what we're noticing is that a lot of artists that are coming into the space now, they're focusing more on the art and on leveraging their community, right? The core community, the types of NFT projects, even some of them are non-transferable to begin with, or pay high penalties for early transfers or flipping. Or so it's I think going back to the fundamentals, either whether you're going down the GameFi vertical or the art vertical, that's important as well.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more artists who are just spending a lot more time on the art. And like even things like profile pictures, I think the art is going to pick up. There's going to be a lot more hand touch to it. And not to say less automation, but more hours put in overall.
Cool. Guys, I don't want to keep you for too long. I really appreciate the time, especially you guys are so well spoken. It's so nice to have that on the podcast. I want to end up today's show and give both of you an individual chance. Is there anything else you want to mention about Fungify or NFTs or anything you want to plug before we end up today's podcast?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think the next catalyst for the NFT market is going to be NFTFi or NFT finance. And when you look at individuals that hold NFTs in the market today, for a lot of them, their NFT portfolio might be the most valuable asset that they have. But for a lot of them, they're looking at these pictures and there's all of this money behind it that they can't access. And so NFTFi is what's going to supercharge this next cycle by allowing people to access that liquidity. And we think Fungify is uniquely placed here because we're the only ones that are going to be able to offer the type of safety that's needed in order for people to be able to trust by which they can actually borrow against their NFT. And what I mean specifically here is the least likelihood of you getting liquidated and your ability to gain that capital. And so I'm really excited about what Fungify is going to offer in terms of that.
Yeah, really unleashing leverage onto the market. And leverage is such a huge thing in terms of markets growing. Like early Bitcoin, I forget the exact year, probably circa 2012 era, when there were actually derivatives for Bitcoin. It was such a massive thing that caused it to actually grow a lot. And I think the same thing is going to be happening for NFTs. You bring in leverage, you bring in derivatives, you get a whole lot more money in the mix.
And that's a perfect way to end off today's podcast. Hanzo and Mob, thank you again for today's show, making time in the evening, your time. You like what you've heard today, listeners, don't forget to check out Fungify on their website. Check out the Discord as Mob suggested as well. It's a great way to get involved with not just Fungify, any project you're involved with. And don't forget to please check these guys out. And maybe we can talk to you guys at the end of the year for a follow-up podcast to see how everything's going. And we'll catch up then.
Sounds great.
That sounds wonderful.
That's all we have time for today, folks. I and everyone at 21Co really appreciate you stopping by. Please don't forget to check us out and our website, 21.co. As stated during this episode, nothing said here by either party constitutes financial advice. This content on this podcast is strictly for information and entertainment purposes only. If you like what we do, you can follow us on social media, Twitter at 21company_, LinkedIn at 21-co, or check out the amazing content our research team puts out. You can also follow the company and any of the employees on LinkedIn to keep up the latest podcast releases. 21 Shares also puts out a monthly newsletter with all latest insights on the crypto market. You can sign up for that on the 21 Shares website. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone and everyone. See you next time.